understand, and you've come to the conclusion that whether it is spaceships or not, it would be wrong to put the word spaceships into the English translation, because the word spaceships didn't exist. The idea of spaceships and airplanes, these terms, these modern terms that, and when I say modern, airplanes existed, in non-modern times, in times much earlier than ours. What I mean by modern is that these terms were created after the time of writing, and that's what I mean by modern. I don't mean it's recent. I mean you're using terms that don't fit their time period to define words that were written in their time period, and that's called a prochronism. That's a translation blunder, and I hope you can agree with me on that. And if you're going to agree with me on that, then you might want to think about a lot of the other translation work that's done in the Bible. If you saw, another similar one was if you saw the word bishop in the Bible. A bishop is a technical term for a Catholic or Episcopal title of one of their clergy jobs. The Episcopal and Catholic Church and their titles of their jobs didn't exist at the time of Scripture's writing. The people that wrote the Scripture wouldn't have used the word bishop to define, to write, at all in writing their letters to other believers. I hope you do see these obvious mistakes as prochronisms, and you understand what a prochronism is and why it's so important that you don't do your translation work like this. I'm an ESL teacher in Japan, and if my students translated English works into Japanese, or Japanese works into English, old Japanese works into English, and I saw this kind of shenanigans going on, they would be marked down on their paper. I want to ask you, when Christianity came about, when did Christianity come into existence? And I would argue the answer to that question is Christianity existed before the beginning of time in the mind of God. But I don't mean spiritually, when did Christianity exist? I mean historically, when did Christianity exist? And especially in relation to the history of language, when did Christianity begin? The Bible talks about when it began. It has a couple of verses. So I'm going to read Acts chapter 11, verse 26. It says, "And when he had found him, he brought him to Antioch. For a whole year they met with the multitude, and taught a great many people. And in Antioch the disciples were first called Christians." So here we have the beginning of Christianity. Some might say Christianity began at Pentecost. Some people might say Christianity began with Christ. The word Christianity, you can't have the word Christianity without the figure of Christ, the historical figure of Christ. There were a lot of Christs in the Old Testament. King David was a Christ. King Saul was a Christ. They were anointed to be king. They were heirs to the kingdom. So they were God's anointed men, so to be king. The heirs, if you will, of their kingdom, of the kingdom of Jerusalem. So anyways, Jesus historical figure, after his appearing is when Christianity began. The followers of this figure, and I'm using his name Christ as his name, not as the meaning of who he is, which Christ means both. But anyway, I hope you can see that Christianity and the Christian culture and terminology that Christians use came about after Christ walked the earth. You have to agree with me there. Christianity started with the figure of Christ. It says right here, the Christians were first called Christians in Antioch. They weren't called Christians before that. This term didn't exist before this time. So if you wrote this word Christian in the Bible before this chapter, it would be really wrong. I hope you can see that that too would be a translation error if you had called disciples Christians. And Jesus picked the 12 Christians or something. Jesus selected the 12 Christians. If you define disciple as Christian, you're making a prochronism. You're adding a term which didn't even exist at their time. They're not understanding the culture and language of that time, and they're pushing in all kinds of assumptions into the text, and they're ignoring the author's intent and what they're saying. They're ignoring their whole culture, life, and understanding and view. You have to write translations as if you are that person. You have to stand in their shoes and write how they would write. So in their time period, I got out on the street and I asked someone, and I called a taxi and I said, please drive me to the nearest church. He's going to take me to a Christian church. A church. He's not. The word church is a Christian word. It's a Christian term created by Christian culture and all its meaning. Church services, church worship, and the gatherings of church gatherings, and the people who belong to church, all of that were created by Christians. And all of those ideas and those words were not even they didn't even exist before the figure of Christ. We have to compare that and contrast that with the word that it's defining, the word ecclesia.